Episode 141, How to Be a Better Parent by Healing Your Relationship with God with Crystal Haitsma.
Welcome to Latter-day Life Coaches, the podcast where each episode is a conversation between me, Heather Rackham, and one of my amazing coach colleagues. Each coach here is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and a highly trained, experienced life coach making a great impact in the lives of their clients. And together, we have one main goal, helping you live your best life no matter what. You ready for this conversation with a coach? Here we go.
Parenting is a role in life that many of us don't get any formal training in. We often end up parenting the way we were parented, and for most of you listening, the model that was shown you was a fear-based parenting style. Coach Crystal Haitsma is a coach that focuses on a different approach to parenting that she likes to call connection-based parenting. She has come to believe that this is truly how God parents each of us, and if we want to be able to parent like He does, we need to heal our relationship with Him first. She is talking on the podcast today about how being a good parent is an inside healing process for the parent, and when a parent does this, the children will follow and change as well. This is a great episode and one filled with hope because research shows that no matter what age your children are, even if they are adults, you can change your relationship with them and truly gain greater connection. If you're wanting a new way to parent, definitely come listen. See how you can heal your relationship with God, and then contact Crystal and let her help you in this process. Enjoy this podcast.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the podcast today. I have a fun coach with me, and I'm super excited to visit with her today. And it's one of those coaches where when I talk with her, I have to ask her where she is because she has kind of a nomadic lifestyle. I've come to discover it. It's so fun. But I have Coach Crystal Haitsma with me today. And so, yeah, I know I just shared a brief little blib that you're a little bit nomadic, but I would love for you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about you, Crystal. How you doing?
Good. I'm doing so well. I'm excited to be here. And yeah, we are a little bit nomadic. I call myself like semi-nomadic. We're like semi-nomads. We like to like travel pretty slowly. And so we kind of just go from place to place. Right now we're in Alberta, which is where we're from. We're down by like the mountains. So like right by the Rocky Mountains on the Canadian side of Glacier National Park in Montana. In Alberta, it's called Waterton. And we are here until the fall. And then we're traveling. I guess this is the fall when you're listening to this. We're traveling in a couple of weeks to go around like Europe and maybe Southeast Asia, maybe Asia, kind of all around the world for a year. So that is fun. We both work online. So, and then we homeschool our kids. So that's a little bit about my like family life, I guess. I have 4 kids. My oldest is 16 and my youngest is 7. So, and we've been homeschooling for like 11 years. So a long time.
Good for you. I think that's so exciting. And what an adventure your kids are going to have coming up. That's so fun.
Yeah. Yeah, we're excited. It's going to be a grand adventure. I kind of like every year was like, maybe we'll do it next year. But now like my son, like it's kind of his last year around the house. So we're like, we should probably do it this year. So we're excited for that. We also love working. My husband does like online tech stuff for coaches and online entrepreneurs. And so that's helpful for me. And I'm a parenting coach. So I help people with their relationships with their kids, specifically in like conscious parenting, attachment-based parenting. There's a few different kind of modern lingo around it, gentle parenting sometimes. And I help people that are wanting to parent in that way, but finding it challenging to actually like do it every day.
Mm-hmm. So I'm glad you shared with us what you do in your professional life as well. The like little subcategories that you put in there, gentle parenting, those sorts of things. I know they're buzzwords. They're things a lot of us hear, but there might be some people listening that are like, yeah, I've heard that, but what does that really mean? Do you want to do you mind breaking that down for us a little bit?
For sure. Yeah. The term that I like to use is connection-based parenting. It's kind of like my own way of describing it because I think what it really is a focus on connection over behavior modification. So instead of trying to get my kids to listen or get them to go to school or get them to stop lying or skipping classes or whatever it is that we want, it's focusing less on how do I control and modify this behavior and more on relationship and connection. And that's how I actually teach. I teach through that connection, through that attachment. So some people call it conscious, which is really just being more intentional about what's happening inside of myself. in what I'm bringing to parenting. And some people call it like gentle or respectful, but in general, I think it really is just noticing the parenting patterns that have been passed down through the generations, which have been a lot more fear-based and a lot more coercive and a lot more shame and guilt-based, and kind of noticing like, okay, we kind of want to do things differently. And what does that look like? And I think that's what kind of bred this idea of attachment and connection and relationship. And also just seeing the outcome of like past, I'll call it traditional parenting methods, how when those children became adults, kind of what they brought with them, what wounds they brought with them from childhood because of how they were parented. There's a lot of research to say that things like timeouts or yelling, or in the past, like spanking or grounding or taking away toys or sticker charts or whatever, how those work. And they work because they work immediately and you kind of get the outcome that you want right then. But over time, there's actually just more to it. It's like, well, what does work really look like? And what are the long-term effects of this? And what's my actual end goal? Like, is it just this like immediate result of my kid listening to me, or is there more to it that I'm interested in? And so for me, my kind of like route into this was that I had a neurodivergent kid. I have a couple of them. And you'll find often that traditional parenting tactics don't work on them, and they'll just get more belligerent. And over time, their behavior will actually be exacerbated because they are so frustrated with this really like black and white, like rewards, punishments based of parenting that typically is done. And so that's kind of what threw me into this world of like, now what? Like, what do we do now? And we need a different way. And so that's kind of what got me into this. And that was kind of a little, hopefully a simple description of what this parenting style is.
I think it was awesome. And one of the things that you said was a lot of it has been passed down traditionally, a lot of fear, a lot of punishment based coercion. And that to me, like, watching that transition, and I can say this here because we also talk about our religious culture, but that sounds so much too kind of like the transition that we've been making in our faith, right? Through in our religions, like our views of God have really taken on they've gone through that same course, I would say, which I think is interesting because we are going to talk about that in some way today.
We're going to talk about
the crossroads. Yeah, there. So
I was going to say, I just love that intersection because it's something that I didn't really realize before. So I actually found this way of parenting a long time ago, like when my kids were toddlers. My parents gave me a book called Hold On to Your Kids by Dr. Gordon Neufeld. And he talks about the attachment developmental relational theory or whatever, it's long. And I loved it. And I love the theory. And my parents said, like, we did not parent you the way that we should have. We kind of did a bad job. And like, here's a book and it will tell you a better way. And my parents were still parenting. They still had young kids at that time. I was the first one to be married and the first one to have kids. And so it was interesting to see them kind of transition and change their way of parenting over the years. So different than like the first few kids, like to the last few kids of parenting. And now, like fast forward a long time, seeing those adult children and their relationship with them be so different too. I'm like, wow, this really, like, it really does make a difference. So many things for so many reasons. But for me, it just didn't work. Like, I read the books and was like, but how do I actually do this? Like, could Dr. Neufeld come to my house and like tell me how to do this? And over time, I've realized that what didn't work for me was that I was focusing on like the change in them. Like, I was trying to change them still. Like, I wanted to do a different mode of parenting so that they would listen to me better, or they would like be more obedient or do what I want them to do or whatever. So there was still some like subconscious work there happening. And I also didn't understand that conscious parenting comes from my own inner healing. I really felt like conscious parenting was something that I could learn to do by like saying certain words or behaving in a certain way or whatever. But it really is from my own healing. And I wasn't turning inwards at all. It was very like external. And it wasn't until I paused and really started my own inner work that I was able to see that this parenting comes naturally. And now, fast forward several years, how that really coincides with our own relationship with our heavenly parents and kind of where all this came from in the first place. And now it's my favorite thing to talk about, but I don't often talk to primarily religious audiences. Usually it's just kind of like everybody. And
Yeah.
so I love having a platform where I can be like, this is actually what's happening, you guys, like in our brains and in our relationship with God and all the things.
Yeah.
So I'm excited for this conversation.
Oh, I am too. I love it. And you said that we have to heal ourselves. Like there's our own inner healing that needs to happen. And yes, without that, we can make some slight changes, right? Like we can make some slight changes and we can make some progress, but the real work, the nitty gritty of it really does start to happen when you start to heal yourself and
There's a quote somewhere that's like, healing is an inside job.
yes, something like that.
And it's so true. It's like, we're trying to do this external thing. And like, yeah, for sure, there was changes that I saw, but it wasn't until I started turning inwards that I started to see huge changes. And the crazy thing that I noticed over time was that my kids' behavior that I had wanted so badly improved naturally. Like that is actually the outcome of conscious parenting. So conscious parenting comes through inner healing, and conscious parenting equals the behavior changes in my kids that I desire over time in a much more sustainable, like ingrained way, instead of just doing it because, oh, I want to avoid a timeout, or because I don't want my mom to yell at me, or I don't want my cell phone taken away. Like it's more internal. If we want to teach something intrinsic, we have to teach it intrinsic. We can't like teach it with this external thing.
Yeah. And don't you I hear that, like that healing. And I think that's exactly why and we can talk about this because we're here in the like a faith-based arena, but like that's you're right. We can heal ourselves. We need the savior for so many things. And part of it is in that healing process. I don't love the word repentance just because it kind of has a negative connotation for so many people. But that is that's the healing. Like repentance is the healing. It's learning and gaining different perspectives and getting them from within. And it's
the
this
atonement,
process.
right?
It's the atonement of Jesus Christ. Yeah.
Is healing. And I will also mention, because I don't love the word healing, because we presume that something's wrong with us.
Yes.
Like,
It makes it sound like something's broken.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what I like to tell people is that healing is actually remembering. Healing is remembering your worth and your value and your enoughness. And the more that you can be reminded of that, and the more that you can remember that, the more healing and change comes. Yeah. So when we say healing, we're not meaning like, because you're so broken and you need to fix yourself.
Right.
But that's the view that I take on healing.
And I think it's perfect and so helpful. Like looking at things from that perspective is it's interesting how just the words you use makes a big difference too. And it does in our parenting as well, right? It's something we learned. So, okay. So why then would you say that our connection with God is so important in the way that someone parents?
Because our earthly relationships often mirror what we believe about our heavenly relationships. So having a secure attachment with your parents when you're a child, looks like you want to be close to them. You want to be like them. You care what they care about. You want that like physical proximity. You want like love and belonging. Like there's some like deeper roots of attachment. That all is a result of attachment. And that's based on the attachment theory. When I'm reading this book, I'm thinking, well, of course this is the case, because this is like mirrors our heavenly relationships.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
But it wasn't necessarily how we were taught to view God. So what I mean by that is, if I feel complete and wholly and unconditionally loved by my parent, then I'm going to feel welcomed to like be my worst when I need to be my best when I can be. Like, it's just like, it allows all of me. And when I can be all of me, then that's a space where change and growth can come in, and where learning and where, everything that I want can happen from that space. And it comes through the parent role modeling the behavior. So it's less about like, I'm going to read you a book about this, and I'm going to have a lecture about this. And it's more about, how do I show up in the world? And I'm showing that to you. And then that's how you learn also. So this is kind of how attachment-based parenting works. So if you look at our attachment with our heavenly parents, if we have that same kind of relationship where we feel unconditionally loved, which is loving without conditions, loving no matter what, loving no matter how I respond, how I behave, how I act, how much scriptures I do or not read, how much visiting teaching I've done, or whatever we call it now, ministering, all of those things, right? That he loves me anyways, even when I don't do those things. If I truly feel that love from him, I actually feel more settled and I actually feel more secure. And I want that closeness, that proximity. I want that sameness. I want that belonging. And so I naturally decide to improve myself or be close to him or do things that will, improve that communication because I feel that love from him slash our relationship with God. So our Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother as well, that we feel that way from them. So Heavenly Mother, Heavenly Father, and Jesus. I kind of think of that as like my parental Godhead figure up there. And I'm like, yes, if I feel like that level of attachment, then these roots of attachment are there. And then my behavior naturally changes and improves. So the problem is we didn't often have like a parental caregiver to like mimic this relationship that was like that, right? Our parents were usually very much like, I will give you timeouts, grounding, spanking, yelling, shaming, force, and fear if you do something quote unquote bad, like wrong. And if you want my love, my connection, my attention, my support, that only happens when you're good, whatever good looks like in your home. And so if that is how we were raised, which most of us were, and this was also a lot of the times how we were taught within the gospel.
Right.
So we're getting this from the gospel. We're 100% getting this from school. We're getting this from community. We're getting this from home. If you ever read like books, media, all the things from like 1900s to 2000s, we're still getting like that was still the message, either consciously and overtly or not. Then we kind of like get to the space of like, well, how could a God figure love me unconditionally? We've never seen that in life. How could that possibly happen? And we might get little glimpses of that throughout our life, but it's really hard to change our parenting with our kids when we haven't yet changed heavenly parental relationship. And when we have an extraordinarily difficult childhood, like a lot of people do with some really heavy trauma, it's going to be really hard to feel that way about God.
I love the explanation that you just gave. And it made me start to think that as a parent, if we view our relationship with him in that way, like there's consequence, I'm only accepted if, as parents, then we have this desire, this need to like control our kids, because then we think, well, they're not going to be loved, accepted of God. We're not going to have an eternal family. We're not going to have all these things either. So it's like this trickle down effect that comes, like we get scared as parents because of how we think how we view God as well.
Understand heavenly things in a logic way.
Yeah.
We just really muddle up things for ourselves when we get too much in our head about it.
Yeah. And so when we fear like what the consequence might be for our children, then it puts a strain on our relationship with our kids, because we get frustrated and uptight and scared when they might be behaving quote unquote in not acceptable ways. Yes. And so it like not only strains our relationship with them, but it restrains our relationship with God. And it's kind of just becomes this big convoluted mess. But when we can see that we are loved and accepted, our children are loved and accepted, no matter what, it frees us up to be the parents that we want to be. So I am always telling people, you have to really get clear on your relationship with God before you can actually clean up a lot of the stuff that's happening with your kids as well.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is I've coached some stake relief society presidents, bishops. I coach couples and individuals. And it's interesting to see that even the people that we think are doing all the things still feel like it's not enough.
Yes.
And I'll use this one example. Brene Brown, she gives us this concept of like, are people doing their best? And she realized that for a long time, she didn't feel like people were doing their best. She's like, no, they could always be doing better, until she was in a situation where she kind of saw it on the other side, where she knew she was doing her best and somebody else felt like she wasn't. And she was like, oh, wait a second. Like maybe people really are doing their best. So her and her husband have had this conversation for a long time. And she kind of decides that and she's seen this in her research as well, is that people who live a more wholehearted life, who enjoy their life more, have the underlying belief that most people are really doing their best. That like in that moment, even if you're seeing negative behavior or something that you don't want to see, that they're really doing their best. So she has this like idea and this concept and this belief. And so she asks people a lot, in the beginning of her conferences, she'll say things like, who here thinks that people are doing their best? And she said that usually it's about like 50-50-ish. I don't know if it was her or somebody else that mentioned that sometimes people that are raised in a more like Christian based, sometimes a little bit more black and white, sometimes a little bit more shame based way, don't feel that way as much. So I started asking people at the beginning of my public speaking events at churches and then outside of churches. And outside of churches, it was almost about 50%. And inside of religion, it was about like 1 or 2 out of 50 people that thought that we're doing our best, or that other people around us are doing their best, which is the same thing, right? If we think that other people are doing their best, then we can believe that about ourselves. And if we don't, then we don't about ourselves. And it was interesting because the one time I was doing this, like nobody's hands in the bishopric went up either. It was like, there was a big group of people and there was like one person who was like, maybe, another person that was like, kinda, and then like 48 people that were like, no. And this happens over and over again when I ask in religious arenas versus non. And I think that most Christian conservative homes kind of parented in this more traditional way that I was talking about, right? A little bit more like, I love you when you're lovable, when you do the things that I think are lovable, and I don't when you don't. It's not like we're consciously trying to do this, but these are things that are just kind of happening. And even if we don't consciously believe that, we often just like act as if we do because we're responding in these ways because we haven't realized that we have these subconscious beliefs about ourselves. So when I talk to people that you would think are like, really do believe they're doing their best, they're bishops, they're stake relief study presidents, they're running all these things, they still don't. They still see that there could be more to do. So then I ask them / these other people that I had them raise their hand or not. And I said, okay, well, at what point is it your best? And they always sit for a minute and think about it. They're like, oh, well, I guess if I did this, this, and this, and this, and they kind of list this whole list of things. I'm like, oh, so perfect. And every time they're like, yep.
And a checklist, right? Perfection involves a checklist.
Yes. And that whatever they've just written down is like completely unattainable in this life. So I'm like, okay, so you never get to feel the relief of like, I am doing my best ever in your whole like human experience. And then some of the people that I talk to kind of push back and are like, yeah, but it's because if I just let myself believe that I am doing my best, then I won't do anything.
Yes.
Right. And we have the same concept with our parenting. We're like, well, if I just love my kids and believe that attachment and connection and relationship are what matters most, then they'll just get away with everything all the time and they'll never learn and they'll just become whatever, like vagabonds or whatever.
Yeah.
That's kind of our go-to. So then we keep doing what we're doing out of fear and shame and force and control and whatever, because we think we have to beat ourselves up to keep doing things the way that they should be done.
Yeah. And it's so hard, right? Because then sometimes parents are like, okay, so does this mean I'm just supposed to throw up my hands in essence and just let my kids do whatever they want? They don't, then they have struggled to find that balance. So maybe you could speak to that a little bit too. Like expectations, are there expectations? Are there no expectations, right? Like where does that leave us?
Okay. So I'm going to say there's 0 expectations, but I'll get back to that in a second.
Okay.
There's this spectrum. And on one side of the spectrum, you have force, authoritarian. That's how most of our parents parented. Not all of them, but most of them. That is like fear and punishment and yelling and spanking and bribing. And that's even like rewards, like positive rewards, because it's really more about forcing the behavior we want to see. It's very external. It's low physical and emotional safety, low relationship, because it's so external. And it's not this feeling of like, I'm unconditionally loved and supported and accepted and whatever. On the other hand, we're like, well, we have to do that because then we're going to go into the other side, which is permissiveness. Permissiveness is like also low physical and emotional safety because there's no guidance. It's just like, you can do whatever you want. So when I say there's 0 expectations, I say that because expectations aren't about your child. They're about how you show up in the world with those expectations. If I have this whole list of expectations for my kids and they don't do that, which lots of times they don't, it's about the energy that I'm bringing to my parenting and my life because I've chosen to hold on to these expectations. So that's a whole nother conversation, but I would release all your expectations. In the center of this beautiful humanity that we're in is like this perfect combination of like connection and teaching. And that teaching, just like how Jesus taught us, does sometimes come through our words and does sometimes come through story. Story is really important in teaching. But more than any of those things, it came through example, right? That's what everybody talks about with Jesus. They're like, how did he teach? 100% of what he taught was example. He used these other little things, but like most of what it was example. So I tell people the same. I'm like, 80% of what you're going to teach your kids is going to come through you, your being. You want to teach your kids self-regulation? How is your self-regulation? You want to teach them how to manage screen time? How do you manage screen time? You want to teach them the importance of their relationship with God? How's your relationship with God? And it's not even that you have to vocalize those things all the time. They just like learn it from your being.
Mm-hmm.
And then 20% of the time we can use books and stories and words and conversation and all of those things, take those teaching moments. But most of it is just through your being. And that's where attachment comes in. That's that center space of like secure attachment where our kids are going to want to be like us. They're going to want to be around us. They're going to care what we care about. That naturally comes through a secure attachment. And so if that's our focus, instead of behavior modification, over time, we actually do get the behavior changes that we want to see in a more like long lasting way.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, attachment and relationship go together. And think about the relationship that sort of parenting then breeds, right? Like you said that I'm assuming it's your younger siblings as you watched your parents shift their parenting, that you said even their relationship is different. And like, that's what we get to take with us when we leave this earth is our relationship with other people. So why would we not want to do the things here and learn the things about ourselves that can help us have these relationships that are beautiful and something that we want to, I mean, obviously we have the opportunity to have them. We get to have them forever. And why wait until forever? Like, why can't, let's work on them now.
How it's supposed to have joy in our posterity, right? That always would like hit me because I was like, am I having joy?
Yeah.
Do I really enjoy my relationships with each of my kids? And for a lot of years, I couldn't have said that I really did feel that way. And it hits me every time I think about that. I'm like, I don't think that a lot of people really do feel this joy. I think that we go to church and we learn about these lovely, glorious things and we listen to conference and then we're like, okay. And then now what? Like we go home and we still yell at our kids, or we're still breaking up our kids' arguments all the time. Or we're just not feeling the like joyful aspect of parenting that we feel like we're supposed to feel, because I think it all comes back down to our own relationship with God.
Yeah.
And when I talk about like changing a relationship with God, it's more than just like, okay, I've listened to this podcast and like, I understand that God loves me. Like you might logically feel that, but like, do you really feel that? Do you feel like when you read your scriptures that you're not reading them enough times, or you're not reading them deeply enough, or you're not praying sincerely enough, or you're not ministering effectively enough, or you're not magnifying your calling enough, or you're not going to the temple enough, or when you are going to the temple that you're not pondering enough when you're in the temple, right? Like if you're wondering if what you're doing is enough regularly, then there's some healing to do there in your relationship with God. And in just changing this idea of conditional versus unconditional love from God, because there's a lot of evidence that our brain has picked up on that, like we're only loved wholly and completely when we're doing good.
Yeah, that's such a fascinating thing to think about. I'm working with a client right now who is really kind of trying to understand her perspective and her relationship with God right now. And she gets hung up a lot on what if these other people who think it looks like this, and this, kind of like the checklist, like what if they're the ones that are right and I'm wrong? And we have all this stuff that just kind of convolutes it and gets in the way. And it's just hard to unlayer all of that, right?
Like that is a totally different topic, but I'll just mention quickly in that we have spent our whole lives in this like information age, right? Like even before the internet, there was just a lot of information. There was a lot of like research and data and experts and leaders. And so we just got so used to listening to other people's opinion. Right? Like we sing it all the time. We're like, follow the prophet, right?
Yeah.
Go do what they say, do what your parents say, be obedient. Like, and so we have these ideas of like, that we should just listen without listening to us. And something is only truth if it resonates with us inside ourselves, right? It's not just like follow the prophet blindly, no matter what he says, no matter what. We don't want our kids to follow somebody on their own without like wondering inside themselves, like, how does this feel for me? Right? I don't want my kids to get the idea that every authority figure should be listened to, and you should do whatever they want you to do, and, say whatever they want you to say without listening to themselves also. Right. And when it's truth, like truth with a capital T, universal truth, divine truth, it will resonate inside of yourself.
Yeah.
And so instead of it being like, are these people doing it right? Or are these people doing it right? It's like, wait a second. What's right for me? What's right for my life? What's truth for my life? And for me personally, when I peel back all those layers of like digging into my own personal authority, it helps strengthen my relationship with God, to be like, wait, he wants me to be an agent. He's given me agency. That doesn't mean I'm just supposed to follow blindly. That's not what agency is. Agency means like, I acknowledge that there's a lot of different options here. There's a lot of different ideas and opinions. And I'm going to ask within myself, and I'm going to make my own decision, and I'm going to move forward in my own life being an agent. So for me, changing a relationship with God was really like the crux of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I think outside the church, we call this deconstructing. And inside the church, I'm like, we need another term for it, because people feel like, oh, deconstructing means that eventually I'm going to not believe in God anymore.
Right. I'm going to lose everything. And I'm going to lose my faith.
And I'm going to lose my faith.
Yeah.
And it's not that. I think deconstructing is more about, what do I believe about God? What do I believe about myself? What do I believe about myself in relation to God? What beliefs have been passed down to me that maybe aren't serving me? And then how can I reconstruct? How can I create a relationship with God that does serve me? And when we do that and have that relationship with God, I think that it's so much more natural to parent in this way. Like, we don't have to like be reading the books or have people tell us what to do or whatever, because it's like mirroring the relationship we feel like we have with God. But when we don't deep down have this, like, we can't just say that we have it. We can't just like talk like we have it. Like, we really have to believe this. When we do have that, then it just flows out of our being and our parenting.
Yeah, so good. We often, like this same client that I was just speaking about and that you so beautifully responded to there, like the question always comes up, and then how do we know truth? How can we ever know what's true? And that's it, right? Like the truth, it comes from, we recognize it within ourselves. And so it really begins to be so much about, we're not trusting other people, but we learn to trust ourselves. We learn to trust that we will know what's true. We can feel it within ourselves. And it's a beautiful thing.
My favorite author is Sue Monk Kidd, and she's like a Christian spiritual author. Right now she's a novelist, but back in like the 80s and 90s, she was a Christian spiritual author, and she calls it the God spark. And she said the God spark is like the God within you that's connected to the God outside of you. And those are the same. Like, there's a unity there.
Yeah.
And so there's never going to be somebody that says something that I can't access the truth within me to see if that's truth for me, right? Like, we're told that we can know truth from error. Like, we're given that. We know that, but we don't actually believe that in ourselves. So it's just like shifting what our work is, right? Shifting our focus from like parenting and what do I do about the situation and whatever, to be like, okay, wait a second. Let's start at the basics. Like, we can get there eventually, but the beginning, it's like a building block. And the beginning is, what are my beliefs about God? What are my beliefs about me and my relationship with God? And what maybe needs to shift and change there. And I think that's where the healing comes in. And from different modalities, it can be coaching, it can be therapy, it can be meditation, yoga. There's several different things that I found that are supportive in that, but let's do this work first and then move forward to the other areas of our life.
Well, it's foundational to all of it. It's so important. Okay. So as we are winding up here, which I have to say this for myself, because I could continue to talk about this all day long, but I think there's a couple things here. Like, there's people that are listening that are probably like, okay, so how do I make this shift? And is it even possible? Like, is there a point where it's just too late? Like, that ship has sailed and I just can't do it. So maybe you could address those things for us.
Yeah. So what we know from parenting research is that it is never too late to change your relationship with your child. There's no age that they get to where you're like, connection-based parenting can't change now because I've done it differently for so long. And I will also mention the fact that this also means adult children. I've coached
Mhm.
plenty of people with adult children and plenty of people with babies. The same concepts follow. So it's never too late. And also that you don't need more than one. So if you're listening to this and you're like, well, yeah, I'm on board with this, but like my partner isn't, that's okay. They don't have to be. Your child, it's amazing if you have lots of attachment figures that are all secure and it's all wonderful and stuff, but you don't need that. You need one in order to help your child gain the emotional resilience that you want. Because what we're really looking forward to is like, we want a child that becomes an adult that is emotionally resilient, that has shame resiliency, that has emotional regulation skills, that knows things like personal responsibility, that has empathy, compassion, right? Like those are the values we actually want in the future. We don't teach them through timeouts. That will never be taught through that.
Mhm.
And so if that's what our like value or our ideals or our goals are in the future, your child only needs one person to do that. And you can even take a little audit. Like, if this is what I really want to teach my child right now, how am I at this? And like, is this something maybe I could work on? Emotional regulation, for instance, isn't taught through telling your child how to do box breathing. It's not asking them what color their emotion is. Those things can be helpful, but that's not actually how it's taught. Emotional regulation is taught through co-regulation, which is the energy that I have, the energy that I'm bringing into the room, into the situation, and then them being able to relax and relief in that because of the energy that I have. So we're just teaching everything in a little bit of a different way. We're like, wait a second, how can we teach this externally? And we're like, no, this is taught internally. How do I internalize this? So that's kind of the work. But again, the beginning work is changing our relationship with God personally. And obviously there's no end game for that. Like you can do it at any point. You could be 106 and decide that you're going to do this work. And that work, I think, is really tender and really special and can be done through some thought work, some through like, wait a second, like what are my views on God and what do I think here? And maybe what happened in my childhood to make me feel that way, because their healing is a lot of like self-compassion work. And so I think that there's a lot of containers you can do this in. I think you can do it through therapy. If you find a really good therapist who can help you through that, can also be done through coaching. But I can't just say like, yeah, it'll happen overnight. And these are like the steps. There's not really like a 1, 2, 3 guide on changing a relationship with God, but it does come through thought work and through feeling work. So think, feel, do. Our thoughts create our feelings fuel our actions. So there's going to be some thought work, there's going to be some feelings work, and then you'll notice the changes happen in the end.
Amazing.
Mhm.
Crystal, thank you so much. I love these conversations. I love any time we get to bring God and Jesus Christ into a conversation, and like parenting is the thing that we all want to have relationships with our kids. Like it's a work that we pour our heart and souls into,
We
and
want to find the joy from it, right? Like, and also that it's possible. Like it's easy to listen to me and think like, oh, she must just be naturally calm and peaceful and attached. Like, no, this came from completely the opposite of everything I'm talking about. My childhood was not like this. My home life, when I was a parent with my kids, I was spanked, I yelled, I was impatient. I stayed up late watching Netflix and like scrolled social media. Like I was not this person. And it came from healing my relationship with God. And I don't think I noticed that that was happening at the same time until I looked back and was like, oh, okay. Like that's really the shift that was happening. And I've wanted to have this conversation and bring this healing for a long time, because I'm like, this is what we need, really. Like this is, if we change our relationship with God, then our goals will change and our relationship with money will change and our relationship with our kids and our partners and all those things change. So anyways, it's just a message that's so needed. So thank you for allowing
I'm
me the
so
space to come
glad
on here and talk about it.
this, like that very subject of, or me saying this really begins with our relationship with God. Like that's where we need to shift our perspective. If that comes up in so many of my conversations with coaches for the podcast, in so many places, it is the core. And we think that it's like all these big, huge things that we need to do. But if we can focus on that one small thing, it's amazing what happens. So
it is,
anyway.
it's life-changing work.
Yeah.
And now when I think about having joy in my posterity, I cry because I'm like, yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Like I really, really do.
Like right now. We don't have to wait. It's
Yeah.
possible like right now. Okay, Crystal, where can people find more of your amazingness?
Yeah, well, I created a course specifically for this because I kept talking about the same things in secular ways. And I was like, I need this. I need this intersection of healing a relationship with God. So I created an entirely new course where that is actually what we go through step by step, where we're like, hey, this week, this is what we're working on, where we can intentionally and deeply and intrinsically change that relationship with God, and then talk about how that connects with parenting and learn more about what we can learn from the characteristics of God and use that in our parenting. So that's called faith-based parenting. And I'll have a link to that below. If you want to just hear a little bit more from me, you can hop over. I'm going to have a little link to a feelings wheel that I custom made. That's awesome. So you can like print it off. You can use it in your house. Emotion work is like half the work that we're doing right now, / more, maybe more than that. You can get on my email list that way. And then I have a podcast called the Parenting Coach Podcast with Crystal. And I love sharing tools and wisdom over there. And yeah, I'm on Instagram at the.parenting.coach. So yeah, I
Awesome.
guess
So
there's a
many
lot of ways.
ways.
So many
Yeah.
ways to connect with me. I
So
also have
many
a really
ways.
fun quiz that you can find your parenting personality type as well.
Ooh,
So
sounds
I'll
intriguing.
have all of those links for you. And I would love just to hear from you. If you listen to this podcast, if you want to send me a DM on Instagram and just be like, I listened to it and I totally disagree with you, then like we'll have a great conversation over
I
Instagram.
love it. I love when people disagree too, right? It fuels some
Mm,
fantastic conversations. But Crystal,
yeah.
thank you. We'll link to all these things in the show notes. And thank you to everybody who's here with us today, and share this with your friends and family, because we all need a little more of this in our
Mhm.
lives.
We
Thank you
sure
so
do.
much.
Thank you.
Hey, we just wanted to thank you for spending part of your day here with us at Latter-day Life Coaches and being part of this conversation. Share this with your friends so that you can have a conversation with them on this topic as well. And as always, subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Have a good one, my friends.